Hi guys, it's Jacob from StringBuzz here, stringbuzzworld.org being a music journalism site, links are in the description down below, and we have a brand new track of the month segment for you today, this time summing up the best, the worst and the independent stuff from April 2017, if you couldn't already tell by the title and thumbnail. It's been a fantastic month in my opinion for music overall, and despite there being a few blips along the way, which we will talk about, trust me, we will talk about these. I have to say that this has probably been my favourite month thus far as a reviewer, ever since starting StringBuzz anyway. We've been doing this for 6 months now on the actual site and only 3 months on the YouTube channel, but yeah, April's been my favourite thus far, the one with probably the most consistent above average ratings. I think out of something like 35 to 40 reviews I've done this month, maybe even more than that, about 50 reviews, I'd say the average rating has been about 6.57, which is kind of crazy when you look at that in comparison to just last month in March, where I felt I was giving below average reviews every single outing. I spent a lot of time reviewing genres that I don't tend to dive into too often as well this month, and I think this upswing of experimentalism and creativity, which I've been talking about for a little while now, which we've been seeing over the last 2 years especially, has began to leak itself into the big three, that being rap, pop and metal. I know it's been there for a while in lots of different states, but now it's hitting that popularity, it's hitting the charts that I've always wanted it to really hit. So should we give a little look to tracks that I like the most from this month and tracks I could do with never hearing again. Starting with my honourable mentions for best track of the month, we actually have 2 Gorillaz tracks. Now going into this month, I was certain I wasn't going to like this upcoming album, which comes out in 2 days, I believe. Yeah, they've been releasing tracks like Andromeda and then the track with Benjamin Clementine as well, which I didn't take to at all, and yet they had really good features on them, but it did sound like that they were just trying to make subpar genre tracks. I mean, I know they were trying to be flexible with their approach, in particular going down the dancehall route and this experimental route, but they were just both bad versions of genre set pieces in those tracks. I mean, you had people like Popcan featuring on a dancehall track, so it should be great. It sounded rushed and it just sounded like somebody who doesn't know much about dancehall trying to make a dancehall track, which it kind of was, I guess. And then Benjamin Clementine's got a fantastic voice, one of the best up and comers around at the moment, completely wasted on the experimental track. It was completely disjunct, it had no driving force to it at all, and I know that they were trying to be progressive about it, but this wasn't progressive, it just sounded bad. I thought a lot of people were making excuses for them, and I think Gorillaz don't need excuses to be made for them. I think if you take their name off of those products in particular, I don't think anyone would have cared for those tracks. But we have 2 great tracks here on the honourable mentions. The Apprentice, first up, had 3 features on it, Ray BLK, Rag and Bone Man and Zebra Cats, all had outstanding outings on this track. It was some of the best features I've heard thus far this year, because they were allowed to flesh out their pieces. I thought Rag and Bone Man was the best in my opinion, because he put in a subdued vocal performance. Actually, he's usually quite explosive, but I thought he sounded stellar on this track, on this very synth heavy beat, laid back beat as well, which is exactly the same as Let Me Out, because that had a laid back synth heavy beat, but this time around with Pusha T putting in a collection of verses which sounded fantastic in my opinion as well. Pusha T is on some form at the moment, and I think when you combined his quite domineering vocal performance with Damon Albarn's EQ'd vocals, which were again quite subdued, quite laid back, I think it created a really nice contradiction within the track, and it made the track feel a little bit more eerie. I've obviously got much more detailed reviews of these 2 tracks on the YouTube channel, so you should check them out if you want to hear more about them. Moving on to my next honourable mention, we have Sleepy Tea by Chon. Now, I don't even think this is one of the best Chon tracks, in fact far from it, but it unveils some new material from this upcoming album, and Chon are the best progressive group around at the moment. Yeah, I said it. And although they had a new bassist coming in who wasn't utilised at all, and there is a lot of filler on this track, the guitar work and the percussion work as well, I can't throw that out the window, is so good and so much better than anything else I've heard this month that it has to feature on this list. I gave it an 8 out of 10 just for that reason. I mean, we had explosive guitar melodies which were backed up by incredible guitar harmonies, Eric and Mario proving why they're probably the best guitar duo in the world at the moment, and again it just paints a really pretty picture like Chon do best. It had great production value behind it with some really beautiful tones. They have the best clean tones, and also I think the drummer put in a bit more of a I don't know, mature performance this time around. He's often been criticised for using his cymbals too much, but I think it was much more frenetic around the entire kit this time around, and we had a lot of better sort of snare work as well. And the kick rhythms were really improved, I think, this time around, because the time signatures in this track are kind of crazy to keep control of, and I think he did a really good job there. Moving on to what is more of a surprise entry for this little honourable mentions list, and that is Hard Times by Paramore. Now, I already said in my review, which again you should check out if you want more detailed coverage of that song, that I think Paramore have transitioned into the modern era much better than a lot of those groups from mid-2000s. A lot of those groups from the mid-2000s in the pop rock genre have tried to go down the EDM route, which we'll talk about a bit later in this worst segment of the track of the month, and it hasn't worked out at all. It's isolating fans, and it's too far away from what made them likable in the first place, where I think Paramore just keep tweaking with little things. Obviously they went all out pop on their last album, which did split a lot of fans. I enjoyed it, a lot of people did enjoy it, but then there was a lot of people who thought that they just abandoned all that made them, like I said, likable in the past. Whereas this new track, it showcases a bit of an indie flavour, a bit of that pop rock from before, a more funky side of things when it comes to the bass line, as well as utilising what they did well with that poppier outing a couple of years back. And I think it's a great combination. Paramore have hit upon a very modern sounding, almost a modern trend actually, because this sort of funky thing, this 80s approach is back in at the moment, and they did it very well. Again, Hayley puts in a fantastic vocal performance, the production value is really strong, the sort of guitar stabs also sound great as well, the Hard Times actual hook is brilliant, although the lyrics are a bit cheesy. I found them very fun, very catchy, and yeah, it's just a very enjoyable track, very listenable, and one of the funner tracks I've had to listen to thus far this month. Moving on to a track that was only narrowly pipped for the top spot, and that's Black Spider-Man by Logic featuring Damian Lamar Hudson. Now, a lot of people have been giving this track flack, especially critics in general have been giving this track a lot of flack, but they haven't considered the context. 2 weeks before this track was released, Logic released a track called Everybody, which was about, you know, not belonging. It was about what it's like to grow up mixed race, basically, that he didn't feel black enough to be black or white enough to be white, and people saw him that way and he was treated differently. Again, not belonging and all the connotations that come along with that. It was a fantastic track, and then he released this almost straight after, which explores the upsides to things. It's almost like a really clever juxtapositioning of singles. This explores how he's proud of being white, how he's proud of being black, how he's proud of being mixed race, how he's proud of his Mexican girlfriend, and I think it sends a really topical and poignant message to what has been happening around at the moment, and people didn't look at that side of things. They just thought it was sappy, and they thought it was just you know, phoning it in, but they just didn't explore anything which he's already said in the past. And I think it's an uplifting track in a month which has been dominated by some really serious rap tracks, some serious rap releases in general when it comes to albums by Kendrick Lamar, Joey Badass, etc, etc. It was nicer to hear something like this really break it all up and just explore some happier things by using rap as its art form. I think Damian Lamar Hudson puts in a fantastic vocal performance on this track. I didn't iterate that enough actually during my review. I overlooked it too much because I actually think this guy has the potential of being a star just off this one performance. He's got an incredible range, really powerful as well. And yet again, Logic just sounds fantastic, dipping in and out of the piano stabs, out of the metronome in general, and his flow is just exceptional. He's both frenetic as well as making each individual word seem that bit more poignant. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this track. You should definitely check it out. Check out my review as well if you want to hear a bit more about it. Another surprise entry onto my honourable mentions has to be Sign of the Times by Harry Styles. I expected Harry Styles to drop a track that was actually good. After seeing, you know, some of the names which he's been involved with around the last 2 years, you know, when planning this solo venture, and the people he's been writing alongside with, as well as his band background. Let's not forget that this guy has a musician's background, so we shouldn't knock him there. I kind of knew that this track was probably going to be good, and Lord behold, it is. I know they've had a lot of issues technically speaking when it comes to you know, chart work and all that stuff, but just put that to one side for one moment and just appreciate the track for what it is. It's a very strong ballad, one of the best pop ballads we've had in a long time, using very organic instrumentation, a really strong vocal performance with really good lyrics as well, and it's almost a little bit progressive. Do I want to say that, or would that offend every single prog fan on the face of the earth? But you can't be too offended because I've already put Chon on this list. But yeah, I like this side of things. It's a really really good approach, a really refreshing approach he actually has to making music. He's by far had the best solo venture already out of all of the One Direction members. They've all gone down very stereotypical routes, whereas Harry Styles has explored something a bit more meaningful, something that isn't as temporary, something a bit more permanent. And I'm excited for this new album just off of this track. I thought the progressions were exciting. There were also some strange time signatures thrown in towards the end, which I enjoyed. And yeah, I definitely recommend you check it out. Moving on to the final track in my honourable mentions, and this one doesn't really count, but it was released just after my track of the month segment for March. It was released right at the end of March, so I'm just throwing it in just to tag it on at the end here. And that's Joey Badass featuring Schoolboy Q and their track Rockabye Baby. Now, I'm not going to talk about this one too much, otherwise this video is going to go on forever and going to take forever to upload. But let's just say it's the best track with the word rockabye in it. I'm throwing shade at the moment, but really not subtly, is it? Just really great outings by Joey Badass and Schoolboy Q on this. Schoolboy Q in particular being the driving force for this track. I thought he puts in an excellent verse on this, really impactful. The backing track is fantastic as well. Just check it out. Now we are finally here for my track of the month, and it goes to London Grammar and their track Oh Woman Oh Man. Now I didn't expect for myself to like this track all too much, because going into this track London Grammar had released a fair few ballads which were just boring, ploddy messes that I just couldn't take to at all, with really cheesy lyrics, whereas this track had a fantastic vocal performance, some interesting time signatures, some really illustrious instrumentation that was both subtle as well as having this really cutting edge with this really natural and organic sounding guitar, which sounded fabulous on their track. It's also got exciting, you know, the verses are just as strong as the choruses, which it's taken a while to find a pop track this year that has verses just as strong as the choruses, but it does have a fantastic hook. I'm not taking away from that. Again, the lyrics could be a little bit improved. They are a little bit cheesy, but the vocal performance makes this track. It's such a strong vocal performance. I know I just touched upon it. Again, you should see my review to see more detailed coverage about it, but it's just a really, really solid and almost flawless track. I think for the job it's trying to achieve, where it's trying to be an emotive ballad, if you take, you know, perhaps some lyrical decisions out from this track, you've almost got the flawless modern ballad, because it's slightly experimental, it's creative, it's very unique, it's stylistic of London Grammar with that natural vocal tone and that really strong vocal performance that we're used to hearing by now. And yeah, I just definitely recommend you check it out. Moving on to my worst tracks honourable mentions, and we'll start out with a controversial one, which is The Cure by Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga was going into this track with a ton of momentum, and I thought she was going to put the two fingers up to the Chainsmokers, but instead she made a track that sounds like a bad Chainsmokers track. It didn't want to be too electronic, so that it was more commercial, and obviously it did the right thing there, because it's #1 just about everywhere at the moment. But it's just bland. It's unbelievably bland, safe and uninspired. The vocal performance is weak by Lady Gaga terms. Again, it just doesn't capitalize on the form she's on at the moment. It's really mundane. It's just stereotypical chart pop track, and it's just a miss in every direction. Moving on to a track that I didn't think was bad per se, but just wasted a lot of potential, and that's Kissing Strangers by DNCE featuring Nicki Minaj. They had a really funky bass line in this track, one that was really catchy, one of my favourite bass lines of this month, but then they decided to replay it for like 4 minutes, put Nicki Minaj on it for no reason whatsoever other than name recognition. She only has like half a verse in this track. The chorus doesn't change anything either. Instead, you just have the guitar following the root notes of the bass, which is what happens in every DNCE track at this point. And yeah, it's not a bad track. Again, there are some funky moments and some really catchy moments in here, but it's so much wasted potential. It's just repetitive, and we have verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, double chorus. I mean, there's too many choruses and too many verses. You've got to change things up a little bit, especially if you're going to use the exact same progressions and the exact same bass line for all of these little segments. Noah Cyrus makes her debut to my honourable mentions when it comes to worst tracks with her new track Stay Together. I was excited for this track actually. I thought Noah Cyrus put in a great vocal performance alongside Labyrinth on her last single. So I went into this track with an open mind. I thought, you know what, this is a Cyrus sister I can really get behind. But no, it's again just another really bland, safe performance with a weak vocal performance actually that doesn't really suit her as an artist at all, as well as her being what, 17 or something, talking about a lifetime of drugs and hurt and like almost like sex abuse. Something tells me that this was written for her and not by her. Then we have Best Behaviour by Louisa Johnson. Now, I don't want to put any more on Louisa Johnson. She's had a bad month in general with a lot of scandals and stuff like that, which aren't scandals, it's just unfortunate, and thoughts go out to her when it comes to that stuff. But this track is just boring. Again, you won't find many really bad tracks on this list this month, other than the actual worst track of the month, which I thought was awful. Again, it was just a really safe, really predictable, uninspiring pop chart track with nothing about it at all. Same progressions throughout, repeat over and over again. Verse, chorus, quiet in chorus, double chorus. The usual routine, really bland vocal performance from someone who's actually got incredible pipes behind her. So yeah, I think it's unfortunate that she ends up on this list, but in a month that has had a high music quality, she sticks out because of it. Moving on to the final honourable mention for the worst track of the month, and it's Born for Greatness by Papa Roach. Now, if Falling Reverse taught me anything, it's that you shouldn't try to incorporate rap into hard rock or metal. I know it worked for the new metal stage, but that was about ended about 17 years ago now. This track sucks. I mean, I was so excited going into this track. I actually enjoyed some of the singles that Papa Roach have released ahead of this Crooked Teeth album release, and this song is, again, really bland, really uninspired, but a terrible rap verse and a terrible vocal performance in general. The worst lyrics, you know, they're meant to be these empowering lyrics. Yeah, the most mundane and pathetic lyrics I've heard in a rock track in like 4 years, 5 years now, and this track was very close to being worst track of the month, but it was pipped to the point by someone you're going to see regularly appear on this little segment if they keep stretching out their album release. Moving on to the worst track of the month though, and you've probably already guessed it, it's by Linkin Park. That's 2 months in a row now, featuring Pusha T and Stormzy of all people, and that's Good Goodbye. You have two fantastic features on this song. You have Pusha T, who's coming off some form with that Gorillaz track, a fantastic feature, one of my favourite features of this year so far, and you have Stormzy, one of the biggest rappers around at the moment. He's single-handedly owning the rap game here in the UK with his grime approach, and he's reinvigorated the grime scene in general. And then you've got Linkin Park. Like, it just doesn't combine at all. You have Mike Shinoda put in a trap verse on this, you have Stormzy put in a grime verse, and you have Pusha T just put in like an experimental rap verse over a track which is really mundane. This, you know, it's more of this EDM anthemic crap that Linkin Park keep producing at the moment, with which is unbelievably bland. And you have a terrible vocal performance by Chester again, because as I keep saying, his clean voice cannot carry a track this big. His clean voice isn't good enough. Again, the lyrics are terrible. Stormzy is on this track for about 10 seconds. He's a pointless tag on, and again, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, double chorus. It's just over and over again. It's repetitive, it's boring. I don't want to talk about it anymore. If you want to hear more of me ranting about it, I've got a good 7-minute review here on the channel, which you should check out. Before we finish up this little segment, I just want to give a little shout out to my favourite independent track of the month, and that's Haunt by Ever. This singer just keeps surprising me over and over again. This is off of her upcoming EP, or just released EP, I'm not quite sure yet. And it's just, it's like Jack Garrett meets prog. It's got really exciting timbres. That's probably my favourite part about it, in fact, that the synth timbres are kind of wacky in this track. This really strong sub bass that carries these really exciting progressions, a really strong vocal performance with fantastic harmonies, and she's not afraid to really let the ambience show in her music. If she needs to drag out a theme to really flesh it out as full as possible and get every little inkling out of it, then she'll do that, and I find that really interesting. Again, the time signatures in this track are kind of wacky as well, and it's actually just a really strong EP that I genuinely think you should check out the entirety of it, but this track is a standout for me. So there we have it. Do you have any opinions on any of these tracks? Do you have tracks that are even worse or even better and I should check out? You should probably comment them in the comment section down below. I think that would be appropriate. So if you like this video, then please leave a like, subscribe to see more, and I'll see you around next time. Bye-bye.